Hi, and welcome to the Windows Instant Recovery and Bare Metal Recovery demonstration for the Unitrends System Administration course. In this how-to video tutorial, we're going to take a look at setting up Windows Instant Recovery. How do we create a VFC? We're also going to perform Instant Recovery in audit mode, and we're going to do an integrated bare metal recovery. Show you what that process is like too. So here once again in our environment, kind of the first thing you have to do is figure out where you want to do this from. We'll talk about doing it from the hot target later on, but here we're just going to go ahead and look at our local appliance first. I'm logged in on my local source as myself. I do want to check to make sure there's any outstanding alerts. I don't have any of those. And also make sure you check kind of your active queue down here to make sure you don't have any recovery jobs going on right now. We're getting ready to do Windows Instant Recovery. It is going to use the active queue to create these jobs. We'll show you that as we start to build them. But we really want to make sure we don't have the machine we're looking for out here under our recovery tab. You'll notice that by default it goes to the backup catalog. We want to go into our instant recovery area and see if we have anything out here existing. Now, I have already created an instance of a VFC for my Exchange agent-based asset. I created this VFC instance and pointed it to my Hyper-V server. It's in an idle state right now, which tells me that it's already all current. There's no pending backups, and it's all current from its newest backup points, even the applications. We talked about it in the presentation on how to enable the application databases for SQL and Exchange. I've done that here on 2 of my databases. So it's pretty cool to be able to keep those up to date as well too. Let's show you how to create these things first, then we'll come back here and talk about managing these a little bit more and how to put them into audit or live modes, right? That's your goal. Now this is pre-conditioned, pre-set up here, pre-planned. You plan ahead and this becomes instant recovery. If not, you have to add these machines in after the fact, and it takes time to create these machines. You have to go through the recovery process to get it all the way up to date. To create instant recovery, you have to start over here actually in the backup catalog, but you don't really have to highlight anything or check anything before you start instant recovery, by the way. But it's always kind of a good idea to make sure you have valid backups for an asset before you put it into instant recovery. So here for this asset, my SQL SharePoint 2 server, I've got a synthetic differential from today. We talked about that in File Level Backups module. And then I've got these incremental recovery points from before that and throughout the week, all the way back to my newest full. There's an incremental here from the 4th, because if I go all the way back to February and I take off the successes here, I do have my first full, which is a warning for this machine. Or it ran back here in the second, excuse me. It was just out of the date range of the sorting. For my Win 7 desktop, if I go all the way back here, I'm giving a warning here because I'm not able to do instant recovery from this machine. Remember, we've done an inclusion list where we've by default now excluded all the critical disk metadata, so we can't do instant recovery for this machine. All right, once again, we're doing our SQL SharePoint server here. We're going to take this machine. It doesn't matter. We don't have to check anything in here, but I do want to make sure I have good fulls, good backups, at least a good full, right? If you remember back to the presentation. So now, once you realize you've got this machine, you also have to make sure, once again, that you've allocated instant recovery storage space. So out here under your appliance configuration, once again, we learned how to manage that in our setup and configuration, and it's also talked about in the ongoing administration module. But out here, you've got your internal storage. You can edit that storage, and then you can modify your instant recovery allocation. So if I wanted to take this higher than 20%, I could allocate it, but just be aware that, once again, it takes away from your backup storage. You're going to lose retention. I don't want to make this change. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this out. I don't want to make that change. That's how you allocate your instant recovery storage space. Once again, check, with the module, check how much you should be allocating based on the resources I'm going to put in. I'm not pointing them to the appliance. I'm not running a physical appliance. I'm pointing these to VMware. If you have a physical appliance, remember, you can point them to the physical appliance, but you need to allocate more instant recovery storage space because they're not going to be built on Hyper-V or VMware storage. They're going to be built on the appliance storage. All right, keep all those things in mind. Remember, check back to the module for all those little caveats on how to set that appropriately, but that's where you set it right there, and that's what I'm demonstrating for you, is going to the appliance configuration, making sure you're on your appliance, make sure you're on that storage down here under the local storage, and then edit that storage and change that allocation if you need to. So I've allocated my instant recovery storage. I've already done that because I already got a machine in there and it's up and running. It's fine. I can make it larger. I just can't make it smaller than what I need, or that machine will halt, by the way. So now once again, back under my recovery tab, I don't have to worry about sorting or finding any assets. Up here under the toolbar now, not the section, but the toolbar, I can go to Instant Recovery, and I can go to Windows Instant Recovery. You'll notice VM Instant Recovery is grayed out because you do have to be on a virtual point in time for the VM Instant Recovery to show up. Once again, check the VM Instant Recovery module for VMware Instant Recovery. Here we're talking about Windows agent-based instant recovery. You don't have to select the asset off the list. It sorts out your agent-based assets for you, and you choose that asset off of this list. This is where you're going to choose what candidate you're going to make into a virtual failover client, a VFC. On the next page is where you start to point it to the resources. Once again, if you have a Recovery Series appliance, you'll see the physical appliance listed in here. You can point it to it. Okay, here we're going to point it to VMware. All right, but here I can choose my VMware host environment. Right, if I have vCenter, I'd see a list of all my hosts. I only have the one host. Off of that host I choose now, I can see the resources of where I want it to go. I can choose the storage. Once again, I can choose the network. I put in my own address that I want it to use. Now, I'm going to use actually 175 in this case. Now down here in the gateway, I'm going to put in my same working local gateway. All right, I do want to make sure that I use a unique address up here. Ping it, make sure it's not in use. Now on the next screen over here, you're getting a little bit more detailed into the guest configuration, the client configuration. You'll notice down at the bottom, I'm not backing up the S drive, so it knows it can't keep it up to date. If you were including it, it would keep it up to date. All right, I can also set any applications here. It's already including the master model in MSDB. I have to go down and tell it, hey, I want to include these other 4 main DBs here too. Whenever you back up those machines, let's keep those databases offline up to date as well. You'll notice the name up here. You can rename this whatever you want. You may want to choose to call this thing WInIR, so you know it's the Windows Instant Recovery version. You'll notice that when you try to save this, you're going to get a memory prompt up here. This one has to be in multiples of 4. I usually recommend that you bump it up 1 notch. Then resave this so that clears that multiple of 4 warning up there, setting the memory in multiples of 4. Now you'll notice here that when it goes through and starts to create the Windows Instant Recovery machine, we pointed this one to VMware, so right away it's going to go ahead and create that data store back for the Windows Instant Recovery. Now this data store, it contains the integrated bare metal Rescue ISO. We're going to show you how to use this ISO in our manual integrated bare metal process later on. You're seeing here now that it's creating a new virtual machine with whatever title we gave it. And once it's done configuring that machine, it's going to go ahead and send a power on command as well too. Now you can go in and edit the settings of this thing. You can see what the DVD is pointed to, that it's pointed to the ISO on the data store out here, but it's booting up to the Unitrends integrated bare metal menu. This is the same menu that we're going to use once again and do manually when we create our own recovered machine using the integrated bare metal manually. The instant recovery creates the virtual machine, points to the ISO, runs the agent in the background here, so every time I run a backup, it's going to restore it into this offline machine, keeping it up to date as a virtual failover client. All right, I don't have to watch this back here for the Windows Instant Recovery. I'm just showing you that. Once again, here under your Instant Recovery now, you'll see we have a new asset listed. It's pointed to VMware in this case, and I can see the host that it's going to. It's in a new state still, which means that it knows it's booting up. It's eventually going to try to reach out to 1743, our agent. Once it can do that, you'll see this go into a restore state. Once it goes into a restore state, it's going to go through and start putting back all the incrementals for the OS to get it up to date. Then it's going to go through and do the databases that I selected through those recoveries as well too, putting the databases back. Once the machine is all the way done through all the pending backups and it's in idle mode like ours is here, then you can put it into audit or live mode. But once again, this machine is just booting up back here, running the Unitrends menu with whatever address I gave it. You can see now it did flip into a restore state. You're not going to see or do anything back here. You might as well just close this thing out and leave it alone. Don't get in the habit of looking at those or modifying them at all. If you do misconfigure any of the network addresses, you have to tear this down and reconfigure it from the start. That's where it does take time for it to clear out the assets and delete and remove all the settings, and it doesn't show back up into your list right away under your backup catalog. Because once you create the machines, they go off this list. And it takes them a while to show back up on the list after you tear them down. So make sure when you're creating them that you're double and triple checking all of those settings so you know these restores are going to start to work. Now that this is in a restore state over here in my job queue, under my active catalog, under my active jobs, I see this first restore starting to restore over to that booted machine running in VMware now. Now we're not going to wait for this one to restore. What I'm going to do is once again over here under my Instant Recovery tab, I've already got a machine that's in Hyper-V. So in Hyper-V over here, if I log into my Hyper-V environment, through my Hyper-V Manager here, I've already got a Unitrends DC Exchange 2. Now, if I open that up or look at the console right now, it's once again running the machine that's using that 100.177 address. It's just booted off of this menu once again so it can keep this machine up to date from the live backups. Okay, now if I go to my Unitrends console and I put this machine into audit mode, you'll now see that this machine is going into audit mode. You can view the details of it down here. What it's doing is in Hyper-V now, it's actually shutting down the Unitrends menu. Okay, you'll actually notice it's going into a checkpoint state real quick first to capture the state. Then it modifies the configuration and reboots it into the OS, the Windows operating system. You'll see that process happening now, shutting down the Unitrends menu and booting into Windows. All right, what I'm going to show instead why that's time-lapse in there or running in the background, because it may take a little while. You know, in my environment, I'm not running the fastest environment. Everything's nested all off of one VMware host technically, even though we're going off Hyper-V here. So we're going to let this job go into audit mode here in the background. Once again, you can view the details here. It'll say, you know, that it's in full audit mode once it is in audit mode, by the way. Once again, you could sit back here and watch it. You know, I'm not running the fastest equipment back here, so it may take a few minutes for it to actually reboot and do its thing back here. So we'll go ahead and let that thing run back there. What I want to take a few minutes to show you on this demonstration as well is what it's like to run instant recovery off of a physical appliance. Once again, this is myself logged into my 814S. Okay, you can see here I need to check my alerts once again. Make sure you're always checking your alerts and check to make sure you've addressed any error messages. I have addressed all these error messages. I know why I'm getting these error messages right here on the 10th and 11th still on these two servers. I've already addressed those. Now, what I want to show you over here is that if I go to my recovery area for instant recovery, you can see that I've got two machines in here that I put into the VFC that are pointed to my Unitrends appliance. Now, I can go in and view the details and see that I've given this thing 4 processors and 4 gigs of memory. And this file server client, I've given 2 processors and 4 gigs of memory as well. Now you'll notice down here at the bottom that these have VNC ports. All right, what's cool about boxes that you've pointed to the Unitrends appliance is that depending on which box you're on here, so I can see the file server down here is on 5904 and the media server is on 5905. So if I look at my VNC viewer and I'm going to the appliance address on 5905, then I can view the remote desktop session for this client booted off of that integrated bare metal ISO. All right, once again, you don't have to do anything back here. You'll notice it's working off of a bridge network address because remember, you do have to configure the network bridge. And remember, you do have to configure this from the legacy interface. All right, so out here under the legacy interface, if you plan on going live with these instant recoveries, then you have to make sure that off on your legacy interface, and you can log in as you if you're a super user, and this setting is global. So it doesn't matter who you do it as, just make sure you do this. And under your settings for instant recovery, you'll notice options out here for your network bridge and your virtual network. You need to make sure you configure these things. You need to make sure that you add a virtual bridge to your ETH0. I have not done this here on my physical 814. I've never taken a machine live yet, but maybe it's a good idea to go ahead and invoke this now. So now I'm able to go live if I ever need to go live with these machines. Now you will notice also when you look at your instant recovery settings for Windows under the legacy interface, a little bit more dynamic of an interface. Here you can actually see, once it comes up, the two assets and how much processor memory they're using for the total allocations I can have. A little bit easier to manage. You can see I've given it here, about a terabyte worth of space. These two machines aren't hardly using anything. If I don't feel like I'm getting enough retention, I can back off my instant recovery storage a little bit maybe. A little bit easier to manage here. Now, it doesn't take into account anything you have pointed to Hyper-V or VMware. And, through the legacy interface, you can add these assets right off the list just like you can off of VMware. But you'll notice that in my physical appliance here, when I go to my VMware Instant Recovery, and I bring up a machine that I'm backing up the entire machine on here, you'll notice that I have the option to do the appliance, VMware, or Hyper-V. I can set my VFCs up to go to all three if I wanted to. Now, once again, you can only have one VFC per client, so once it's in here pointed to the appliance, you can't point another one to Hyper-V or VMware. You can only point it to one place per asset. But now, once again, if I take this machine and I put it into audit mode, right, what you'll notice in this VNC viewer is it closes right away. And if I go back to this VNC viewer and I get it ready for that same port, down here at the bottom eventually, when this goes into full audit mode, it does take a minute, eventually I'll go back to that same VNC port and I'll be able to see Windows booting up this time. So there you can see the VNC port is back, 5905, and if I connect back to that VNC port, I now see it booting to the Windows operating system off of the appliance. Once again, it's in audit mode, so the network card's going to be disabled in this case. It's not going to affect my production machine. If it were in live mode, the network card would be bridged. Chances are it would DHCP because of a different NIC, and you'd have to go in and set the static IP and then check all of your applications to make sure they were bridged through to that IP address. All right, but once again, in audit mode, network configuration's disabled. It's not coming up on the network. It's not going to affect my production. It may just be a little bit slower based on original resources and what you can afford to allocate inside of here. So while this machine is still auditing, we've got two machines that we put into audit mode. One in VMware. We added a new machine to VMware. We put an asset into audit mode off of Hyper-V we're waiting on to boot up. And this asset right here, we've put into audit mode off of my physical appliance. All right, but now I want to go ahead and go back to my lab here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just slide this off to the side, and we'll show you that again once it's booted all the way up. All right, but here you can see this one's still in a restore state, so if you go and look at your active queue in here, it takes a little while to build those machines. That's why I was saying earlier in the presentation, you can add them after the fact. You just have to realize the bigger the machine, the more updates it has to do, the longer this process can take until it's in idle mode, right? Once it's in idle mode, then you can audit it or put it into live mode and use it if you need to. What I want to show you next is how to do an integrated bare metal, right? How do we bring a machine back through this same kind of technology, but how to do it manually, right? So in the case of VMware or Hyper-V, it's going to start by making sure that you have access to the integrated bare metal, boot ISO, right? I recommend, once again, that out here on your data store, you create a folder, just call it BMR-ISO. Any ISOs you create for the legacy imaged base for 2003 servers or 2008 standard, you're going to upload those same custom ISOs to this same location. Right? Once again, check the admin guide for the legacy admin guide for how to do a legacy bare metal, image-based bare metal. We're going to focus in this demo on the integrated bare metal, much easier to use. But I've taken that same ISO here, created a folder, and right off of the appliance once again, I've uploaded from the virtual failover folder. So if I browse out to my appliance, there's a folder out here called virtual failover. This is where that data store mounts to when you do Windows Instant Recovery. Now I've already uploaded this same default WinBM ISO. That's the 64-bit ISO that you need to recover an integrated bare metal machine manually. So I've already got that ready. It's easier just to upload them rather than trying to create a data store mount and use it that way, right? It creates them here. You could use it here, but if you ever tear the machine down, that goes away. So you can't use it again. They're really small anyways, just hundreds of megabytes. Now, we're going to be cloning our Exchange server here virtually, but we're going to be using the agent-based backups. Right? Remember, we do have to make sure that under our backup catalogs, we have the correct backups for the asset that we want to clone or integrate bare metal recovery. In this case, we could be simulating a P2V migration. Maybe we're taking our physical Exchange server and going to try to virtualize it. It starts with the operating system. We're going to recover from this latest differential right here at the top of our list at 3 o'clock in the morning. All right, that's one we verified. That's our recovery point we're going to use. Now we're going to create a new virtual machine in here. All right, it's going to start by creating a new virtual machine, and we're going to use the custom settings in here. We're going to call this thing our DC Exchange 2, and we're going to call it our bare metal recovery integrated test, right? So that's good enough for the name. You're going to name it whatever you want, and this is just a test. We're going to clone it offline. So I'm just going to put bare metal recovery integrated at the end of it so I can see it pretty clear. All right. Now we're going to put it in our no backups group right away so I know it's part of a test. Same thing we're doing here with our other machines. We're going to use our main data store. We're going to use hardware version 8. We're going to set this for 2012. Our DC Exchange is running 2012 64-bit. We're just going to leave it for now for default processor memory just to boot the ISO CD and get the recovery going. We can always come back and modify processor and memory if we need to before we power this thing up after the bare metal's done. We only need a processor and a couple gigs of RAM to make this thing work to get the restore started. It's not going to run any faster if you give it full everything now. All right, we're going to go ahead and create the network in here. We're just going to use our private network. Once again, you may use whatever network configuration you have to. In our example, we're going to use all defaults in here for creating the disk. The only thing that really matters is the size. In the case of integrated bare metal, you can go to the same size or greater of the used capacity. We're configured for a 100 gig original disk, but we're only using about 50 gigs of it, so I can actually only give this thing 75 gigs. It'll still fit and work. Just for my test, I can give this thing a smaller amount of storage. You don't have to test with a full amount anymore. We're going to leave all the rest defaults. It doesn't matter how you configure your disk. The snapshots are still going to change block track and inline deduplication, all that stuff as well too. I always get those questions. Once again, we're going to leave this all default in here, but at the end of this, we're going to point our DVD to the ISO that I've uploaded and prepped on our data store. right? Once again, you could map to an NFS and use that as well, but we're going to go ahead and use the one that we've uploaded. That way I always know where a copy that is. You're going to also make sure you check here at the top, connect at power on. That way the operating system sees it, and it will boot off of that ISO on first boot here. Wait for your new hardware to be created down here at the bottom. Same thing with Hyper-V. It's going to create the new hardware, go through the same process. Make sure you can get to the ISO and create a new machine and point it to the ISO so it can boot off of that ISO. Same thing with physical hardware. You're going to take the ISO, burn it to a CD or thumb drive, and boot your new hardware off of this same image. It works the same way. But it's really easy to do a P to V migration on your own if you don't have available hardware ready. But chances are, if it hasn't already been migrated to virtual, there's probably a reason it's running on physical, and you probably have to get physical back. In that case, you just take this ISO, burn it to a thumb drive or CD, get your new hardware ready, replace your hard disk, whatever you're doing, whatever you're fixing, boot it off the ISO, and bring the OS and the recovery point back to the latest point. But here we can see our machines booted up. Now, if we open up this console, it's going to look really familiar to us. It's the integrated bare metal menu that the Windows Instant Recovery uses. It's the same menu. We're just going to go ahead, once this comes up, and continue through this recovery. Now, kind of just as a reminder why this thing is kind of going through the motions of booting to this integrated ISO CD for me, or ISO for me, remember, we're waiting on our instant recovery to come up over here on Hyper-V. And once again, this machine over here, I staged with the agent-based instant recovery. Now, I don't think I have enough processor memory to run this instant recovery off of this host. I tried it. It failed. It's not going to work. I could tear this down from here and just delete this whole machine. But also, once again, over in my Unitrends appliance, I can go to my instant recovery tab, and here you can see it says it's in audit mode, but that machine is off. It's not running. It failed the power up, the start. I don't think it has enough processor memory to go through this. Right, so it's failed the audit test over here on me. Right, so I probably want to end the audit here and then go ahead and tear this machine down. You don't have to really wait. And remember, you get the choice here to delete the virtual machine from the hypervisor and the appliance, or only the appliance. Now, it's defaulted for only the appliance, and in this case, I want to remove it from both. I want to go ahead and do the top option to remove it from both. So when I click tear down here, you're going to see it go ahead and remove it from here, but it still has to go through the motions of removing the machine back here on Hyper-V. So it's going to go through back here, and eventually it will tear it down from this view as well too. Right, you will see it clean up after itself back here. Now, once it goes through all those teardown processes, over under your backup catalog, you should see that client show back up here under your client list. Right, it has not gone through the refresh process of making that client available for another VFC recreation, so I don't see it on the list. But I could go through and highlight DC Exchange 2, point it to my Hyper-V host, but I could go through the process of recreating, selecting the DC Exchange 2 host, pointing it to VMware, and doing the same process that I'm showing you here manually. Right? It would do it all automatically for me. Right? But you can go through this on the back side to do your own integrated. Once it's booted up, you see the options at the bottom to map additional drives. Maybe you got drivers on network drives that you need to get to. You can go to the command prompt to troubleshoot. You can do driver injection right here. Maybe you already laid the bare metal down and the first driver didn't work. You need to come back in and just try a different driver. You can do that right from here. The biggest thing on this screen that you got to do before you proceed into starting a restore is make sure that your time zone is set correctly. If your time zones are off, your points in time are going to look off. Remember, we're looking for a point in time at 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern, so we need to be on 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern. It has to match your local source or the hot target, whichever appliance you're going to. Now, the cool thing about the integrated bare metal is it allows you to select between the hot and local source appliances. In this case, we want to look for the local source for our DC Exchange 2 at 3 o'clock in the morning should be our newest recovery point. It automatically selects the newest recovery point for the client when you choose it off this list. So you'll notice here when I go to the next screen, I'm now going to verify. Whoops, I do get a BIOS prompt here. It just lets you know that the BIOS types do have to match, and in this case, the BIOS type is unknown. It's no big deal. We are going VM to VM technically underneath. All right, in some cases, you have to make sure that BIOS matches going from type to type. Now here you can see we have to verify the drive mappings. In our original disk configuration, it sees it as 100 gigs. Now I have to know, basically through the capacity report on my appliance, how big is this machine? Right, so if I go out here to my appliance and I run the capacity report, and I'm looking at putting back my DC Exchange 2, through the agent, it says it's using about 31. I know after expanding and running Windows and restoring everything, it comes out to about 40-something. Right, so plenty of room to fit on that 75 gig new drive, even though it reports 100. So it's up to me to know that this is going to fit. You'll see that it prompts me and says, "Are you sure?" We're going to say yes to proceed anyways, and there's 2 prompts because there's 2 volumes. All right, we're going to go ahead and hit the next button over here, and here's the last part of the restore. It just says start the restore, and then inject the drivers if they're necessary. You may be going VM to VM, and you don't have to restore any or inject any drivers. It's the same type of disk controller underneath. Now, if you're going physical into virtual, we include the drivers for VMware, Hyper-V, Zen Server right inside of this screen. We'll show you that when this is done. All right, we're just going to go ahead and start the restore down here, and you'll notice that this is going to go ahead and send the job to the appliance, and then the appliance, you can see this job running in your active queue as well too. So we'll see over here in our jobs in our active queue, we can now see a DC Exchange integrated bare metal. Right? It actually calls it a unified bare metal, but we'll see that running here in the background as well too. Right? That's using that integrated agent booted off of that ISO. Could be physical hardware as well. Just as a quick reminder or a quick note, while we're watching these jobs run, these are concurrent connections. You might have had this job running earlier and saw it running at a particular speed. It might slow down once this additional restore really starts in here. Okay, so as this thing really does start to pump data over to this new virtual machine, any other restores or any other backups, once again, they may slow down in their transfer speeds. Just be aware of that. Concurrent connections, once again. Just want to give that quick reminder. All right, while that bare metal is running in the background, let's go ahead and show you the audit mode here we have running off of my physical 814. Remember, we put my media server into audit mode, and this here, you can see the audit mode version works. I've got enough processor memory. I've got enough storage under instant recovery, and I can log into this client. Once again, the network configuration is offline. You'll see that in the Windows configuration when you get in here. All right, but pretty cool to be able to test these machines, make sure you can boot up the operating system, get to certain applications, look at data, in an offline mode without affecting my production media server. So we'll let that go ahead and boot up to the operating system here, slide it off to the side, and we'll watch this bare metal restore in the background as well too, and time-lapse both of these for you. Here you can see the audit mode server is actually already up. I can just type in a quick note here saying I'm auditing Win Instant Recovery or something, just so I have a note in there. You'll notice down here at the bottom once again that the network configuration is not it's not active, it's not enabled. You can go in here and open this network connection summary, and you'll see it looks like it doesn't even have a network adapter. It looks like it's empty. In audit mode, once again, you're not going to affect your production machine, but you are isolated off the network. So if this server relies on any of the other dependent servers, you're kind of SOL. You do have to kind of bring those over together, invoke mini networks in between them on the virtual bridge, and keep them offline. Don't use the original addresses. But this is a fully functioning, auditable machine. I can verify here that I can boot off the operating system. Once again, when you're done with this auditing process, on my 814, if I go to my appliance here, I can see my media server is in audit mode. I'm just going to end the audit mode. Because if I leave this in audit mode and I run a new backup, that backup will stay in pending until it's out of audit mode. So you want to make sure you're not affecting any recovery processes by leaving these in audit modes, right? Because it will hold those future backups up until you take out the audit mode. So now it's back in idle mode. Eventually here you'll see it boot back up into the Unitrends integrated menu, that WInIR, WinBM that's out there off the virtual failover folder. It'll boot up into that menu and get ready for the next round of restores. If I go over to my VNC over here, it's already closed that connection. Then eventually it'll give me those same ports that I see down here for my file server. Instant recovery audit mode off a physical appliance, right? Or audit mode off of any server, it's going to boot up into the operating system. Once again, you can see the bare metal restore here. Once again, on the client side, you can see some statistics here running as well too. Really just need to watch it from the appliance side, and once it's done, you're going to reboot that machine without the network configured so you don't affect your production. We'll go ahead and let that keep running, and I'll show you that process when we're done. You can view these jobs in here once again. This is the manual bare metal that we're running here. I can view the status from the backside once again, or I can watch it from inside of the active jobs queue here. Once again, I'm running basically two bare metals because it's getting my SQL SharePoint up to date the same way. All right, remember this server right here, it's going through the same process as a bare metal, but Unitrends is doing this for me through the Windows Instant Recovery piece of it. I just had to set up the IP address in the network, and Unitrends is going to get this machine up to date for me so I can put it into audit or live mode. This is the manual bare metal that we're running ourselves. All right, so we're back after a little bit here now. We went ahead and let all those jobs run. Our virtual machine for creating the Windows Instant Recovery through the agent has finished up its restores to get that VFC up to date for us. All right, our integrated bare metal that we ran is also completed as well too. Now, the way I can see this is by going to your jobs queue, and in the active queue, I don't see the integrated bare metal or any RDR virtual restores running right now. Okay, and if I go over to the dashboard, once again, you can always click on this recent restores link up here in the recovery summary, and that takes you to your recovery history report. Now remember here, you can sort it by the start time if you have an idea of when that job ran. But it was now a few hours ago, so a bunch of other jobs have ran since then, restoring this virtual machine, getting this database up to date. You can see that all here up until 8 o'clock it ran. Now we know we're looking for our DC Exchange 2 asset, so if I filter on the protected asset here, you can see the bare metal recovery we did this afternoon about 3 o'clock. You can see that it took about an hour's worth of time to put that disk back. Remember, that's the same time it was doing a bunch of virtual recovery for the RDR Server 2 to get that Windows agent-based instant recovery up to date at the same time. Those assets are in here. So if you filter on SQL SharePoint 2, these are all the virtual restores that it did to get that machine up to date. Right? And you can go in to these details. Anything you filter on and click in here, you can go into the details and you can see that this is a bare metal restore. You can filter once again on SQL over here because that's the Windows Instant Recovery machine that we created. And you can see that each one of these jobs is a virtual restore to create that machine and keep it up to date offline. You can see the IP address right here in use is that same IP address we're using in the Windows Instant Recovery agent. So now that I know these two machines are done, right, you can go over and look at the machines themselves too. All right, here's the Windows integrated bare metal. Right, we brought back the DC Exchange from its latest recovery point. You can see that this bare metal restore was successful. Now, before I reboot this, if this were going to dissimilar hardware, I could inject that dissimilar new driver. Up at the top, you'll highlight your Windows volume, and down in the bottom part, you'll add the driver first. So if you're going to VMware, Hyper-V, or Zen server, or if you have additional drivers for any other third-party controller, you can download or get those OEM drivers, put them on a network drive, and map to that drive. And you can browse out to that network drive here as well too. In this case, we're going to VMware, so we do want to inject the ESXi driver. Want to choose that one off the list and hit done right here so it shows up on our list on the bottom. Now we're going to inject that driver to our Windows operating system. Right? That's our 75 gig bigger drive. So we are going to say inject that driver. It does confirm for us that we do want to inject the offline boot volume to E, the driver into that offline boot volume for E. And yes, we do want to do that. You can see it does confirm that the driver injection was successful in here. So now we can go ahead and just reboot this server. Now before I reboot it though, I do want to go ahead and maybe go into settings. And if this were an audit that I was doing, I may want to disconnect the network card before I reboot it so it does not affect my production machine. Okay, so I just disabled the network. Now I'll go ahead and say reboot down here in the menu, and I'll say yes, I do want to reboot. Now you'll see this machine shut down from the integrated menu and boot into the Windows operating system now. This machine has been recovered from bare metal. While that machine's booting up here, we'll go ahead over to our RDR server, all right, where our Windows agent-based instant recovery here. You can see that it's up and running. We can minimize that one for now. We can see our Windows agent recovery, Windows instant recovery, SQL SharePoint 2 here, running that integrated on 100.75 as we showed in that log. So we don't do anything with here. With Windows instant recovery, once again, it's under our recovery tab. For instant recovery, we see that same asset here that we've created as the VFC, the virtual failover client. When it's in idle mode, first you want to kind of view the details of it. Make sure there's no pending backups. Nothing is still in the queue to be restored to this VFC. You can look at the backup history and you can see the last sets of backups that have been applied and when they were applied. You can see my last set of incrementals was at 3 o'clock and I had a new set of transactions at 8 o'clock tonight that were all restored into this machine to keep it up to date. Now this machine, when it's in idle mode, can be put into live or audit mode. And before you go live with any machine, any future backups will not be restored to this virtual client and it will be marked invalid. You have to tear it down if you need to recreate it in here if you do go live. Right? We're going to take this machine and we're going to go into audit mode. That's going to boot this machine to Windows with the network card disabled so it's not going to affect my production SQL SharePoint 2 server. That is taking the SQL SharePoint 2 server on the VMware side. It's now reconfiguring it and it's going to boot into Windows. We'll open that console up when it's done here. You can see here that it is creating a virtual machine snapshot before it does reboot this, so we do have to wait for this process to finish before it officially will shut down the Unitrends menu in here. So we're kind of waiting for that process to finish before it shuts this down. Once again, our domain controller, it's still booting up. It doesn't have full processor memory, but eventually it will come up to the operating system. You can Control-Alt-Delete and log in and check out any applications you have running on here. Once again, it is keeping Exchange up to date. In the case of our Exchange, in the case of our Exchange here, you could bring it up, the agent will be running, then you would have to restore your Exchange databases to this server. Remember, an integrated bare metal is the operating system only. With the Windows Instant Recovery, we are able to put SQL and Exchange into that virtual machine through the virtual restores every time you back that application up once again. All right, so there's a big difference between doing Windows Instant Recovery and integrated bare metal manually. You have to put back the applications after the manual integrated bare metal. So go ahead and let these two machines still continue to boot up and we'll watch them in the background. So here you go on the back side of the SQL server now. It must be done creating that snapshot back here. So now if you kind of look at this process, it's probably all done creating that snapshot down here. There it is right there. So now it's gone through the reboot process here, and it's going to go ahead and boot that up to Windows for us once again, just like our integrated bare metal. Now, one thing you'll notice about the Windows Instant Recovery is that this machine, when it was first created, had 1 and 1. You now see the configuration change to what you have it set for in the Windows Instant Recovery settings. It just went to 3 CPUs and 20 gigs of memory based on that machine's configuration. Not just 1 and 1 to get it up and running the menu. So it is using production level resources now as well too. Now, one of the last things I'll show you in the UI is both of these are booting up here for us one more time, is that in the dashboard, if you do have any active file level recovery running, you can see that up here in the dashboard and click on that, and that takes you to the instant recovery area right away for you. You can see this is in full audit mode now, which tells me once again that it is booting to Windows. You can see that here in the background. We'll go ahead and let that keep booting. Now, you can also see from your jobs and your recent system jobs, you'll be able to see when you put these things in and out of audit mode. We should be able to see up here that I put this thing into audit mode. There's by the 11th. I see Hyper-V Instant Recovery. I don't see an audit mode in there for the Windows Instant Recovery. So we'll keep an eye on this area here and see if that shows up in the system jobs. I know it doesn't show up in the recent jobs because those are only backups. Once again, we're just waiting for these two things to boot up inside of our virtual environment. The more processor memory you have towards these machines, maybe the quicker they'll respond. You can, obviously, the integrated bare metal here, the manual one we did, you can go in and shut this machine down and give it more processor and memory if you need to. This is nowhere near enough to boot Exchange properly, but it will do the trick if I'm patient enough to boot up and test the operating system without having to use too much resource. So here we go. This machine is up and ready, so I can send, to the guest the Control-Alt-Delete signal. You can log into this machine. You can let it boot up. You can test the applications that should be here, because once again, this is Windows Instant Recovery. So you should have your SQL databases intact that you selected for it to restore. Or you can go all the way through that process if you want to. And once again, the domain controller over here is still booting up. You could, be very patient and wait on this if you don't want to give it full resources up here. Because remember, this domain controller is only running on 1 CPU and 2 gigs of memory, but it normally runs on 3 CPUs and 20 gigs of memory. So it's way underpowered right now. But usually if you're running this bare metal test, you get through the initial splash screen where it pulls the disk controller driver. Now we're beyond that point now because I can see it's going through the plug-and-play process for Windows when it says it's getting the other devices ready here. This is the plug-and-play process after the disk controller. So usually if you're this far, it's a really good sign that you got the right disk controller injected and you're booting to the operating system now. Now, we're not going to wait on this. It's going to just take way too long. But that's a pretty good overview right there for you on Windows Instant Recovery and integrated bare metal.